So I am Adron Hall. I'm from Portland, Oregon. I ride a lot of bikes, take pictures in fog, and I write some F# code. That's where Portland is, the little orange dot there. I put that there because a lot of people don't always know where Portland is. It's kind of like an invisible city in the United States. Today I'm going to talk about cross-platform development, which simply means being able to build stuff across whatever operating system, right? I will be leaving out Windows based on the assumption that if it runs on OS X and it runs on Linux, it's going to run on Windows, right? Because it's F# and .NET and the CLR, etc. But before I dive into any of the technical bits, one of the things I want to talk about are my daily battles and what led me to wanting to be able to run F# on platforms like Linux and OS X. Fortunately, that's not my car smashed up. I was on the streetcar. I was writing code on the streetcar, and then we got stuck mid-deployment, and then I got distracted by the whole thing because we were sitting there for an hour. And I was just deploying some code. And that's kind of seems like how my day-to-day life goes sometimes. I'll be writing some JavaScript or some Erlang or whatever, and then something happens and I get distracted from it. But before, I had the pleasure of being able to, in a relaxing way, ride around on streetcars and deploy code and things like that. I was in happy corporate land, and I did a lot of .NET development with awesome pictures like this. I built CRUD apps. That was probably 99% of the applications I built. I would build a screen for someone to create data, update it somewhere, put it in the database, pull it back out, whatever. Pretty straightforward stuff. Then I made a decision to go into the startup chaos lands, and kind of my whole life exploded. I was like, oh God, this stuff is so crazy, but I loved it because every single time I would go into a place and they would say, all right, this is what we need. We need you to set up something that will continuously deploy and continuously integrate and has all these great features like load testing, and you need to have it in a CDN in multiple regions, and you need APIs and API docs, and it needs to be fully distributed and available. It needs a pretty bow on top, and could you do that by tomorrow? I was like, oh, geez, no, but we'll see what we can do by Friday. And a lot of the things that I started working with, even though I had been in the .NET space, and to some degree the Java space, I all of a sudden found myself working with Java and akka, Node.js, and I just made up an acronym, whatever framework of the hour acronym for the frameworks that seem to come out for Node.js, because I can't even keep track of them anymore. I did some Erlang and worked with React too. Worked for Basho itself, and that was really where my mind started to blow when I was like, holy moly, I can have a regionally distributed data source in multiple areas, and it basically never goes away. And I started saying things like, why do I have a backup? That seems superfluous and unnecessary. And just from working in these startups and building all these applications that needed all of these features out of the box, I started to change the way I did development. Everything became much more loosely coupled, not just in a simple sense of like keep your code loosely coupled, but also in the sense of like I didn't want my editors tied into tool chains in a tightly coupled way. I didn't want my operating system where it was so intrinsically tied to the application that if the app fell over, the operating system would too, or vice versa. Like just all sorts of little things changed in my mind, and I liked it. I honestly felt like, wow, the grass is greener over here on this side. Super happy doing that. Super, super, super happy. But I was a little sad. I had spent years learning all these tools in the Microsoft stack. I liked C#. I didn't know at the time that I liked F# as much as I do, but I liked these tools. I liked Visual Studio to some degree. I love ReSharper sitting on top of Visual Studio. And I didn't have access to these things really in this space for these applications that I needed to build because a lot of options just weren't there. Like Microsoft was not doing distributed, masterless, node deployment application things. It was primarily focused around CRUD applications. Well, you know, all the libs that I was familiar with too, kind of gone, didn't have access to them. I had to learn new frameworks, etc., and that was fine. But anyway, I kind of missed that stuff. And then about, what month is it, September, April, .NET Fringe happened, which I won't say if it was good or bad because I was an organizer. I feel bad about saying stuff like that. But I did get to watch a lot of the talks. And some of the talks really inspired me to check out what was going on in the .NET space again. Because all of a sudden, I saw some great demos of F# running against parallel processing in the cloud. And I saw Akka.NET. I was like, holy moly, this is the stuff that I've been working with. This is the stuff that I've really enjoyed digging into. It's exciting that this is becoming a thing in the .NET community again. So I started digging into it. So right now I am however many months into F# and playing around with this stuff. The one thing that I didn't want to take over, and I did not miss, is Windows Server. Did not miss it at all. Do not have happy feelings about Windows Server. I do have happy feelings about, and Chad mentioned this in his keynote, learn a functional language and learn containers. I totally 1000% agree. I'd been using Docker, and being able to deploy an entire infrastructure and networking environment and all of these things in like 4 seconds was something that I had gotten used to. So I definitely did not want to go back to Windows. Windows is getting there, but it's not quite there yet. So I started playing around with all this stuff. So why F#? One is the conciseness. This is obviously not F#. Everybody knows what this is, right? It's Java, right? No. C#. So it's pretty straightforward. You got two methods, for loop, and it's in a static class, right? It's about as simple as you can make of a class that actually does something. But this is a lot of code. This is a lot of lines of code. There's 7 lines of code to do the same thing in F#. I was like, oh, that's pretty beautiful, actually. Also, the convenience. Being able to create types that actually have some type of, I guess you could say, business logic and structure around them far exceeds, in just a itty-bitty little bit of lines of code, what you can do in C#. And of course, by proxy, the same type of thing you would have to do in Java or some of the other languages like that. So it's just super convenient. Here's some C# code too, and I pasted this in here realizing that you can't read it, right? You know what? Same code that you do in F#, you can read that now, right? So it's readable in a literal and figurative sense too. And it's got a bunch of other features that are great. Correctness, concurrency, and completeness around those things. Like the ability to do an asynchronous call in F# is just like a little bitty blurb of stuff, versus C# where you usually have to start figuring out dangerously sometimes, like, well, what happened to my thread? What did I just do asynchronously? It gets pretty tough. F# kind of handles some of that for you. And then another reason, so I started digging around a little bit in F# and I was like, okay, this language is pretty cool. I'm familiar with some of the concepts. I've done a little bit of Erlang. I have made a complete mess of Haskell. Okay, I'm getting this. But then one of the other things that really got me more interested into it was the fact that the community is awesome. Tons of people were willing to help me out figuring out what dumb things I had done on a day-to-day basis. And I cannot say how much I was super excited about that fact. Because I remember when I started using Erlang, and I forget exactly what the question was, but I asked something on a forum, something like, well, so I don't really get the actor pattern yet. Am I doing the actor pattern, or does Erlang do the actor pattern yet? So someone says, oh yeah, it's really easy to understand. Here, just read this. Sends me 4 papers, a total of about 180 pages of stuff, and he's like, yeah, just read that. It'll make total sense when you're done. I'm like, yep, that's what I got time to do. Read 180 pages of stuff when I need to get something deployed like in the next couple of days. So I did attempt to read the 180 pages. Did not make a lot of progress. So there's a bunch of us in Slack, in the functional programming Slack, which also includes like Elixir and Erlang. Those are pretty good. The F# chat room, I think, is probably the chattiest. We have a lot of fun in there talking about what's going on with F#, as some of you in here know. And then yesterday, also, just to kind of prove out the concept, I was like, oh, I tweeted this. I was like, I wonder how many people I can get to respond to that. So I tweeted that, and then it was pretty cool. Let's see if I can internet for a second. So this is the tweet. I just refreshed it. So it's got a few retweets now and favorites, and this was just yesterday. And like I can just scroll and scroll, and oh, I got a cat too. It's always cool when you get a cat. And it just kind of goes on. Oh, and there it refreshed. So it's more. There's a lot of people playing with F#, and a lot of people that are willing to help you figure things out. So that was just a little fun thing I did last night. I was like, oh, I'm going to tweet and see how many people will respond. Boop. So that was a huge selling point, and that really kind of got me hooked. And I'm still playing with F# today, and figuring out how to get it into production environments and enterprises. That when you say F#, they go, "What is that? What is it? Is it risky?" I'm like, well, just pretend it's .NET, because it is .NET, and just don't worry about it. But it's always a little difficult when you startle executive management in an enterprise. So the other thing that I'm talking about in this presentation, besides F#, which has caught my attention, is the Linux space in startups. One of the other things, besides wanting the familiarity of the .NET tools that I like so much, I wanted to be able to run them on Linux. And I know Mono's been around for a while, and a lot of those other things have been around that help you run .NET on Linux. However, who has attempted to run .NET on Linux, like, say, 2 years ago or 3 years ago? Anybody? 1, 3, 4, 5. How did that go? It was super easy, right? Yeah. I tried it a couple times too, and that's kind of when I was like, I'm gonna run Node, even though it's in beta and it's broken all the time. I just came up with other solutions because it seemed a little difficult. But one of the things I always had in startups, especially living way over on the West Coast near like Silicon Valley and all that stuff, everybody's always deploying Linux. I was just like, what? They don't even know there's other stuff anymore. Just deploying Linux all day long. But also I realized in the asterisk Nix space, FreeBSD, AIX, all that stuff, a lot of those things also run on the supercomputers and these other spaces where there's always this really cool bleeding edge development being done. And I wanted stuff to be able to run on that too, because I had lucked my way into getting some gigs, helping out some people doing supercomputer work, setting up compute tasks to run on these crazy huge systems. So that was why I wanted it to run on Linux and Unix. Oops. Oh, don't. Too far, too fast. There we go. The reason I wanted it to run on OS X is simple. It is the hipster machine du jour. It feels so weird every time, like I'm at home and I go down to a coffee shop and I pull out my Mac and I'm like doing something, and I look around and everybody has a Mac. I go to another coffee shop in San Francisco or somewhere, or a co-working space, I see Macs everywhere. Every once in a while, I'll see a not Mac, and I'll run over to them and say, ooh, what is that? And they go, oh, I'm running Ubuntu, or something like that. So that's life on the West Coast. Then I'll go somewhere like New York or Chicago or like London, and all of a sudden I see no Macs. And like 99% of the machines are Windows machines. I'm like, oh, it's like the rest of the world now. I get so lost in that little bubble over on the West Coast because everywhere there's a Mac. So it just seems like that's what everybody has, but that's not true. However, because that is like the development machine du jour on the West Coast, I want to make sure that things run well on it. So if I do a talk or show anybody what I'm working on, I don't want to pull out a machine that they're all of a sudden like, oh my God, Windows. Because then it just adds an extra layer of nonsense that you have to go through. The other thing that OS X has, which of course Linux has, and Windows will have very soon too, I am assured by several people in Windows, is that it will have SSH out of the box. So you'll actually be able to do SSH into machines and do administration tasks, which will be wonderful. I forget, what's the Windows app that lets you do SSH, that you can download, the little open source app? What is it? Yeah. So like, I always just kind of gave up on installing that. So I usually never had SSH on Windows. But that was the other thing I always wanted to have, because it just seems to make life easier when you're fighting around with Linux stuff all the time. So anyway, those are the reasons why I was super excited all of a sudden to be able to say, oh, look, I got all this stuff that's happening, aka.net, etc., parallel processing with F# in the cloud, all these features, and then in addition to that, I can run it on these platforms that I'm familiar with that so many of my coworkers and cohort also use. So I'm going to show you just some really simple things. I'm 99% sure. There we go. Speaking of SSH, I did find out that that port is blocked, so I can't do a pull off of stuff. But I just thought that was kind of funny. So let's take a look at Atom. Does that sound like a good one to look at? I'm just going to pull it up real quick, open a file. We'll see what it looks like over here. So I'm going to show you some editors real quick that are not on Windows, so we won't look at Visual Studio any. And I'm just going to show you some really basic stuff about how I have been working with F#, which, mind you, is a little bit crude compared to what I've seen some people do. Like the ability with OmniSharp in Atom and some of the plugins that they have for Packet, the package manager and things like that, are really nice, elaborate, and they give you a lot more of a view into your project when you're working with it in Atom. However, the way I've been working with it is editor and command line. Very, very, very crude and basic. Partly because I've been playing with a lot of editors to see how they work with F# on these other platforms. So like, this code is about as simple as you can do. It's very obvious what it does. And if I run on Windows, this is FSI. On Linux and OS X, the command is F#. I don't know why that was the decision, but anyway, that's what it is. And this basically runs a repl for you so that you can just type code at the terminal and see what happens. So if I run that, can everybody see this code okay? I feel like it's falling off the side of the screen. There. Printed hello world. So simple F# code. We just executed that on OS X in the terminal. It's pretty cool. So then I was talking about asynchronous code, right? So everybody can probably tell me exactly what that does. So I'm not even going to describe this. Obviously, there's a part that's async. It says async. That's pretty self-descriptive, right? Gives you a 5-second sleep, and then it prints out some bits. And at the REPL, I can just take this, and I can actually, am I in the right spot? Paste it in like this. Pretty straightforward process, right? Then if I do 2 semicolons, it'll execute it. So then if I snag something to print stuff out, like this. Oh, did I break some? I did. Oh, did I miss that? It helps if I copy all the code that I need, right? I still did something wrong. Say that again. Oh, so oh, there we go. Tick tock, tick tock. I should make it say tick tock, tick tock. So anyway, that's async code right there, executed. So that's in Atom. Another one. Oh yeah, since we have more F# people in the room besides me, will we ever have an understandable quit command? Because I don't know about hash q semicolon semicolon. That's a little weird, but so anyway, that was that code bit in Atom, and then let's take a look at Visual Studio Code, which of course opens on the other window. Did I hear a woohoo? Yeah. So one of the things I actually like about Visual Studio Code is the ability to go back and forth between the C#, F#, etc., and a lot of it's kind of available out of the box. Atom gets you there too. You do have to go get like the plugins and things like that. It's not a big deal, but it's nice to see, well, Microsoft making an effort around an editor that's not Visual Studio, that's not, what is it, 6.2 gigabytes, but a mere 120 or whatever this one is. And it gives you a nice little, like it gives you integration for Git, and it gives you a little debugger. So it'll actually debug your code in F#, which is also pretty nice if you use that. I, of course, like I was saying, I basically stay between the REPL and the code itself. So some of the other things to note are, well, okay, we just looked at the command line, and we just put code in there, right? But obviously, in F#, you may not just want to write a script. You may actually want to compile and have an application bit, right? You want an executable of some sort. So the way you do that is you run F#C, and then like let's see here, I got a game called Hangman that'll run. There we go, we got a build now. So if I look at those files, you'll see I have hangman.exe, and on OS X and Linux right now, the easiest way to run an executable is to run mono whatever the executable file is. So I just say mono hangman.exe, boom. All right, so does anybody know how to play this game? Now that I think about it, it's actually quite a horrible game. But anyway, you basically have a word, and you guess letters of the word. And if you get them wrong, eventually the little stick figure gets to die. So like if I say P, nope. Oh yeah, P was one of the letters of the word. So anybody, pick a letter, somebody. Nope. Oh, getting close. Hold on, let me pull up my other keyboard. No. All right. So letter that we can use. Anybody else? Next one. C. Close. R. X. M. H. We already did P. So I think somebody wants to just hang the port guy. What do you say? I N? You saved him. Good job. So anyway, there we go. We actually built code, made an executable, played a game in the talk. So that pretty much like summarizes the main two things that you want to be able to do with F#. Write script, compile code, and execute it, right? And we did all of that at the terminal on OS X. Works 99% the same way on Linux. Things get a little weirder when you get into the realm of like, well, okay, that's great. You basically ran simple basic code. What happens if you want to run a self-hosting service, or you want to run something that previously ran in IIS? Well, that's where stuff starts to get tricky. Hopefully the core CLR will provide us a lot of new abilities around that won't leave us quite as stuck. There are a number of things that do work. Some of them I've gotten to work pretty well, some of them I haven't got to work pretty well, i.e. they just don't build or don't work. I've gotten a little bit of things to work with Nancy. I've gotten some stuff to work with Freya. I think it's Freya. Yeah, the Nordic god, goddess. So there are definitely solutions out there that will run across the different platforms. But if you take an app that you have running in IIS right now, or you take a WPF app or whatever, and you try to bring it over across platform, things won't be an immediate just like click a button and it works. You're going to have to figure out your architecture and figure out how to make those things, you know, get across the various points. One of the other big selling points of having F# and .NET be able to run cross-platform like this is probably something that everybody here has likely heard about with Xamarin. Xamarin will allow you to build to iOS or Android and you build a mobile device without having to go through and learn Swift or Objective-C or dig up 1.6 gigabytes of Java library, which is kind of nice. Xamarin. I'm just going to kind of pull up Xamarin real quick. There we go. This definitely gives you a more Visual Studio-ish type of environment to work in also. A lot of debugging features, a lot of watches, a few refactoring bits here and there, stuff like that. I know some people are working on this because everybody loves the ability to refactor in your editor, right? I mean, that's a pretty awesome thing to be able to do, especially if you get addicted to ReSharper. But I hear that there are a lot more features coming down the pipe for Atom and Visual Studio Code and those types of things to be able to refactor and really get your code lean and mean. But in here, in Xamarin Studio, if you click New Solution, you'll see that F# is also available along with C# and this VBNet thing, whatever that is. So it's a lot of good parts. They make it really easy to like wire into NUnit and get a good testing framework going on around your application. And as you can see, there's the Android bits, there's the iOS bits, and then the cross-platform stuff. And if you want to build a proprietary OS X application, you can do that too. I wouldn't advise that. I don't know. Native applications are weird sometimes. But Xamarin's definitely a powerful suite. It will cost you money if you actually want to do useful things with it, like deploy Android or iOS. But it's also free just to get, and you can do unit testing and basic assembly builds and all those types of things. As long as your solutions stay pretty small. Once they get pretty big, then you'll start getting messages, pay us. So that's another good alternative. The one thing that I find a little bit of a crux with Xamarin Studio, it's not that big of a crux, but it doesn't work on Linux as an editor. You have to use Mono Develop, which is a different editor. It doesn't have anywhere near the features, but it's still usable. However, a lot of people don't find that to be a problem because Mostly you just want to deploy an app to Linux and just have it run and be cheap and run in the cloud or whatever, like AWS or Azure or something like that. So that's great. You can do your development on OS 10 or Windows, and then you can deploy it over there knowing that it will run. So let's see here. So that's basically my main demo code, just to show you that it runs pretty seamlessly. I mean, it's not like you have to go download 50 extra packages or anything like that anymore. You don't have to do like weird hacks or tweaks. I didn't sit here for 4 hours and set up this machine just to do this. I installed Mono, I installed the editors, and stuff worked. I mean, it was pretty much that straightforward. So with that, any questions or comments? Yell loudly. Yeah. Right. Visual as in like an actual native application running on OS 10? Well, here, I'll show you my last 2 slides, which have some bits for that. So I will provide this slide deck online. I have a page that has a lot of other additional information about what I have gone through in the last couple months learning F#. And that link is on the very bottom there. I also have the code samples that I provided, plus some other ones that I'm putting together, which I will subsequently be talking about in the future, and my Twitter accounts. So anybody can feel free to ping me. I will provide you whatever information I may know. If I don't know, I will definitely point you in some direction to try to find out what the answer is. So that will have some of those things that you asked about. Other than that, my first thing that pops into my mind, if you want to see native applications that run on OS 10, go check out Xamarin's docs. They actually have been putting together a lot of really cool applications that look good and run well on OS 10 without one single line of Swift or Objective-C anywhere. So, cool. Thank you.